Companies such as U.S. Steel and J.P. Morgan and Company headed the Industrial Revolution and helped J.P. Morgan skyrocket into financial immortality with the current powerhouse, J.P. Morgan Chase. J.P. Morgan was a powerhouse during the Industrial Revolution and influenced many historical events such as World War I and the building of the Panama Canal. The pioneer of investment banking started his legacy when he was very young. J.P. Morgan Jr. was born September 7, 1867, in Irvington, New York. His father, J.P. Morgan, was dominant in the finance industry during the Progressive Era. The Progressive Era was an era leading into the Industrial Revolution that came as a response to the economic and social issues after the Civil War. As a child, J.P. Morgan balanced bank accounts for his father. At an early age, he was introduced to the finance industry. Because of this, J.P. Morgan Jr. owes much of his success to his father. By 1903, when J.P. Morgan was 65, he was a tycoon in banking, steel, railroad, and electrical power. J.P. Morgan also headed the banking coalition that stopped the Panic of 1907. J.P. Morgan Jr., more commonly referred to as J.P. Morgan like his father, inherited $50 million and became the owner of the House of Morgan upon the death of his father in 1913. But J.P. Morgan Jr. was successful far before that. While he did not immediately have the same business prowess that his father possessed, he had some early accomplishments as the head of the investment firm. J.P. Morgan's biggest early accomplishment was funding the Allies during World War I. Morgan became so successful from the investment that in the 1930s, a Senate committee investigated Morgan's influence on America's entry into the war. His investments into the war started with a $12 million loan to Russia and then a $500 million loan to France. After the war, the Morgan Guaranty Trust Company managed Germany's reparations. But even before that, J.P. Morgan brokered a deal that made his company, J.P. Morgan and Company, the sole source of supplies and munitions purchases for the Allies. This produced a $3 billion commission for the company. J.P. Morgan Jr. was partly able to broker the deal because of the reputation of the House of Morgan. The Morgans started in London in the 1830s, but moved to the industrializing America, seeing the opportunity to become investment tycoons. The House of Morgan includes Morgan financial companies in the businesses of railroads, electricity, oil, and other commodities for $480 million, equivalent to $13 billion today. Morgan then founded U.S. Steel. U.S. Steel was the first company to have a net worth of over $1 billion, a staggering amount for the time. The tycoons faced a new issue in the form of a presidential election. John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Andrew Carnegie decided to back William McKinley in hopes that the age of the monopolies could continue into the turn of the century. President McKinley's assassination puts Theodore Roosevelt in office. A new era was dawning upon them. The era of the monopolies was over. But J.P. Morgan was not going to fall like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. The first antitrust lawsuit was against J.P. Morgan's railroad conglomerate. Theodore Roosevelt then pursued a long court battle against Standard Oil. The lawsuit eventually succeeded and broke up the oil empire into companies such as Exxon and Mobil. But J.P. Morgan's U.S. Steel remained undisrupted for many years. This is due to J.P. Morgan's partnership with the U.S. government. One loan that J.P. Morgan made to the U.S. government is a $100 million loan to the federal government to end the 2-year economic depression from the Panic of 1893. The crisis formed a post-war railroad bubble and bank failures that caused the country's gold reserves to diminish. Next, J.P. Morgan and his coalition of banks funded the Panama Canal. He raised an astounding $375 million for the project that was going to connect the Pacific and the Atlantic and cut travel time for boats in half. The history of the modern J.P. Morgan Chase and its vast influence is extremely complex and stretches back to the beginnings of the House of Morgan. J.P. Morgan Jr. abandoned everything his father taught him about investing as he found out about electricity. J.P. Morgan Jr. visited Thomas Edison's lab. Thomas Edison is a scientist born in Milan, Ohio. Thomas Edison had over 1,000 patents and is considered one of the best inventors of all time. J.P. Morgan saw the light bulb and was fascinated by it. Young J.P. took a risk and invested everything into Thomas Edison's light bulb. His house was the first in the entire world to be fully lit up by electricity. Nikola Tesla was a Croatian scientist whose parents moved to America. He had his own version of electricity, and instead of using direct current, he used and invented alternating current, which was more powerful than direct current, which was the one that Edison made. Since AC has a higher voltage and Thomas Edison considered it dangerous, he disregarded many of Tesla's works with alternating current. Nikola Tesla, searching for more, left Thomas Edison's lab and set to find an investor. George Westinghouse found Tesla's new innovation fascinating and invested in alternating current. Traveling around America, Tesla showed everyone that AC was not dangerous and showed AC flowing through his body. With AC on the rise, J.P. Morgan became nervous and needed to do something. Edison's powerhouse only powered a half-mile radius, while Tesla's powerhouse could power the whole entire East Coast. The war between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison had begun, and J.P. Morgan realized only one form of electricity would light up America, and he would do whatever it takes to prevail. With the ongoing war between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison beginning to boil, a victor would decide the future of America's power. The Niagara Falls Power Project was announced, and the engineers of the Niagara Project did not know which form of electricity that it would power. George Westinghouse and J.P. Morgan Jr. both received a letter talking about the Niagara Project, and both the investors realized that if they won the Niagara contract, that the other form of electricity would be obsolete. The Niagara Power Project would use massive amounts of water to produce hydroelectric energy, but the contract was still up for grabs. J.P. Morgan by this time was a billionaire and was sure he was going to secure the Niagara contract. George Westinghouse, on the other hand, was not as rich. Both brought options to the table, and nobody knew who would secure the contract. Soon afterwards, a letter goes out to J.P. Morgan Jr. and George Westinghouse. J.P. Morgan was sure he had the contract in his palms, but in a surprise turn of events, the contract goes to Westinghouse, and J.P. Morgan cannot do anything about it. With Westinghouse losing money because of Nikola Tesla's royalty contract, nobody would donate money to Westinghouse, and in days, his business was on the verge of bankruptcy. In a turn of events, Tesla got rid of his contract and investors started to pour in. Westinghouse was on the road to profitability, but J.P. Morgan seized the opportunity in a financial crash, and J.P. Morgan threatened Westinghouse with a lawsuit, knowing he would not have the resources to fight back. Also, J.P. Morgan bought the majority stake in Edison Illuminating Company and changed the name to General Electric. With Westinghouse in a financial crisis, J.P. Morgan buys out Westinghouse and uses alternating current in General Electric.